Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this November 12th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening, as it's been going on now for almost 10 years. My, how time flies, from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can also catch my show on several shortwave channels that I have listed on my website, as well as several AM stations across the South. Now, as I've told you in the last couple of shows, I'm prepared a press release that was done on a YouTube for a reason, because, I don't even think people at newspapers read anymore. I think they just write these stories, and then when they're done, they go to YouTube because they're bored with just writing. I don't really think people read that much anymore, to be honest with you. At least newspapers or stories like this, they prefer to get pictures. So I put together a YouTube press release about the true story of the Alamo ministry and sending it out to now more than 300 outlets. I will, of course, do it by hand, sending it out in the mail as well, to see if people do actually do that anymore. And we'll see what kind of response we get, because I want to get at least this story out in the open. And I've said many times, when you start realizing, I'm looking at a picture right now of the Vatican and a bridge that goes to Castel Gandolfo that I've walked over many times. A beautiful picture at night. A very serene and quiet and peaceful place, it would seem. I want the show to be very quiet and peaceful as well. I'm a bit tired of all these people arguing on the internet over these subjects. In fact, I got an email yesterday regarding how if I do a YouTube regarding some of the facts and truth about the Vatican and the Vatican-led New World Order, that somehow YouTube has figured out a way to censor that. And so I started looking at all these YouTubes regarding the Vatican and all that, and it was remarkable that some of all the ones that I consider to be going in the right direction have very few hits. And then I looked at a couple that were obviously not, and they're 850,000 hits. It's incredible how this may be true, what this gentleman said to me yesterday. I wouldn't doubt it. I don't know how technically they can do it, but I asked him to send me more on that, so it's quite interesting. I wouldn't put it past them, because really, what is the threat here that I'm doing right now? I'm not talking about overthrowing your government or changing how you guys make money in the Vatican. If that's what you want to do and you want to money launder through the Vatican, which court cases have shown that goes on, then who am I to say you can't do it? You've been doing it, you seem to get away with it, and then nothing ever seems to happen. So I'm not here threatening you. If you want to continue to work like that, go right ahead. All I'm doing is pointing it out. Now, is the threat basically just that you don't want people talking about it? Or is the threat basically this? The more people that talk about it, the fewer obedient workers you're going to get. And if that grows, the status quo changed, that could upset the apple cart. Maybe that is the threat. I really don't know. But I know that the Vatican and their agents spend a lot of time confusing people. And I went to a 10-minute video today before the show. I'm not going to play it because I can explain it. And the video basically stated that there are these crazy people out there who propose that the Jesuits and the Black Pope are the head of the Illuminati and all of this stuff. And these people, basically saying, are off their rocker. And then when you saw the word Jesuit, he put in, instead of an S, he put a W, Jesuit. And then he started showing that even if these guys are crazy, the Jesuits are crypto-Jews. and that the Jews are the problem. Now, this takes me back 10 years to when I was really struggling, well, not struggling, but when I was presenting the factual side of the Vatican and all of the different countries that the Jesuits were kicked out of, and facts that can't be disputed. Then, of course, they had to put on a show on the station I was on that was completely opposite, and stating that it's all the Jews are the problem, and that I was a Jew Zionist and all that kind of stuff. So I thought we'd move forward. 10 years ago, I thought we've made some progress in that a lot of people are catching on to this. And I just wanted you to think about that, because there's a lot of confusion out there. And today I'm not in that kind of mood to ramble on over these things. It's really, I think you have to rely on your instincts, your factual investigative instincts, and then look to see the fruits of people's work and see if there's a hidden agenda somewhere along the line. Okay, well, I looked at the Tony Alamo ministry and found out that the story that the mainstream media told us was completely bogus. The court case was worse than a kangaroo court, and now they're trying to take away their property. All because, they've labeled them a cult, the people brainwashed victims, and the courts have really basically said they are not people and have no right to property. Now, I've always compared this to the Vatican, who I consider to be the biggest cult. Now, I've shown that the Alamo ministry isn't that. And what the Vatican has done just recently is quite interesting. They finally, folks, have come up for a solution to their pedophilia problem, to their child abuse problem. Now, if you follow the Vatican closely, and all of their orders, Jesuit, Franciscan, Holy Cross, you go on and on and on, and all of their monasteries, and all of their schools, and all of their 195 or 200 concordats, that's legal agreements with countries all over the world. I mean, they've got it pretty well set. They're in every country in the world doing something. And a lot of it is no good. And so all of a sudden you see all this rash of problems coming out. I don't know how they survive, to be honest with you, but they seem to get larger as the problems get bigger. Their pocketbooks seem to grow as these scandals continue to get bigger. And I wonder why the United States hasn't, the politicians or the FBI or anybody hasn't really dealt with any Catholic schools, any Catholic holdings. I don't see them calling priests child abusers. What they call them are basically what the Pope wants, and that is, we have some misdirected people who we are going to send to they send them to these care facilities that the Vatican controls, and they're going to rehabilitate them. They don't want the prosecute, and in fact, there have been documents uncovered by from the highest levels of the Vatican that have instructed all bishops to keep quiet, do not go to the authorities about child abuse, which basically is obstruction of justice, and the FBI, you think, would be interested in that. So the few numbers of priests that do get caught up in this, I think they're kind of like scapegoats all around the world. I'm not just talking about America. I'm talking about thousands all over the world. I'm talking about genocide as well, and murders that we've talked about in the past in Croatia. What about the mission schools here in America, as well as in Canada? Those stories are horrendous. What about the Duplessis orphans, the story I covered for many years, where the Vatican was in bed with the Canadian and the American governments to falsely label children, these are children that are orphans, falsely label them mentally ill so they can be put in an insane asylum, and then basically used as guinea pigs. I interviewed someone on my show one of the Duplessis orphans in Canada, a gentleman who was in his 60s when I interviewed him, and his job was to take the dead babies and bury them. Now, they buried them in an area near this mental institution, which was close to the Catholic orphanage that falsely labeled these kids mentally ill so they could be put in there and used as guinea pigs and killed. They put them in these, they called it the pigsty, and when they decided to cover this up, they literally covered it up by making it into a parking lot of a government Canadian government facility. Now, there was American involvement in this, and the reason is because the same thing was going on at the mission schools here in America, and that cases have been uncovered in Washington State by a very good law firm named the Tabaki Law Firm, who went after these stories and got a huge settlement from the Jesuits of over $250 million. So in a sense, admitting this is true. So when you hear these guys get on with these videos that start saying, it's really the Jews, it's crazy, because here's the deal. The Jesuits are an order. They're a military order. We're not talking about anything more than that. Now, they can masquerade as Jews. They masquerade as most anything. In fact, remember when we were talking about Tupper Saucy, and I just interviewed him in 2006 and replayed that? He had found out when he was bogusly charged with IRS charges that the prosecutor was actually an ordained Jesuit priest. How does that work? And then you find them working in Nassau. You find them all over. So that there is no, they can be Protestants, they can be Jews. They're placed in places so that the ultimate goal is to control things. So when you start labeling, you better start understanding how this operates. And remember what I told you the other day about this whole story? When you have a deceptive organization, they're not going to leave you a crystal clear trail of evidence so that you can, where they tell you exactly. In fact, they're not going to tell you anything. They're going to hide as much as they can. So you have to basically look at the fruits of their work, who's benefiting. And it appears to me that in America, the Jesuit order and the Vatican are benefiting much more than any small Jewish organization. So let's look at that. And, a murderer is not going to tell you he did it, right? The point I'm trying to make is, one of the most interesting things I found out in the course of researching things, and I verified this with not only through Tupper Saucy, but other people, when we all know, I've heard people say, you have to read Sun Tzu's Art of War to really understand how to deal in business. Or I've even heard basketball coaches like Phil Jackson say he uses Sun Tzu's Art of War in basketball. Now, all right, I haven't read every little paragraph, but let's say, what is the sense? What are we at war over basketball here? What are we at war over, you got preachers going, we read Sun Tzu's Art of War. What, to keep your church afloat? No. It's ridiculous. But when you trace back how this translation came about, in the 1700s, prior to the Revolutionary War, it was the Jesuit general at the time, Lorenzo Ricci, who had the book translated in French by a Jesuit priest into French and Italian and other languages, so that they could use this, I believe, during the revolutions that were taking place during that time. And there are a whole slew of them. When you start looking at the dates of all the revolutions during that time, we had the French Revolution, the American Revolution, we had the Russian Revolution, the Polish, the German, on and on. Start looking at all of them, and all during this one period of time. And you can bet there was a Jesuit involved in all of it. Remember when we showed you their connections in the French Revolution? So, why would an organization like that, a supposed educators want to translate the Sun Tzu's Art of War? Well, maybe it's to use some of that Chinese general's techniques. Well, anyway, that's just a point. But I'm getting back to the statement I made, that the Vatican has now come up with a way to stop pedophilia. And it's an ingenious method, and I'm always curious to see what they're doing and how they're operating. And this is probably something you got to listen to. Now, this is a document that was leaked. Now, we got this Vatileak scandal. Now, who's behind that? Now, I'm going to use some investigative stuff here. So I'm thinking, anything leaked out of there, maybe you're going to get a little bit, but that's going to be hushed up quick. So whoever's behind this may want this information to come out. So, and it's selected because, there's nothing better than to keep an organization like this scandal-ridden so they can make you think that they're weak, that you can make you think that they're really falling apart, when in fact they're not. And so you got to remember that. But this story is worthy of to show you exactly what this group's all about. Now, they have this huge problem of priests who are child abusers, and that's unbelievable if you look worldwide how much that story, I mean, you're talking about scandals that go deeply into schools and into monasteries and into these nunneries. It's incredible. But they've now, I think, got a solution here. And let me talk about that. Tongue-in-cheek, of course. According to these documents, Vatican-owned properties near the Italian Parliament and Piazza Barberini. Oh, that place brings back memories. I used to have coffee right over there every morning. And they're being used now. They've bought properties there as saunas and massage parlors where priests go to pay for sex. So I guess what they're thinking about here is if we can, let them go and do that, they won't feel the urge to abuse your children when you send them to their schools. Now, this was exposed 2 years ago, and a little more came out, but recently something more came out. 2 years ago, here's what was written. It emerged that the Vatican had purchased a huge $23 million share of Rome apartment block 2 via Carducci, which I know exactly, which housed the Europa Multi-Club, Europe's biggest gay sauna. So now what they're doing is they're getting their priests into these gay saunas so that they don't have to do this out in the open. A genius method to cut down on pedophilia and this type of gay sex that they're having. Tales of visiting priests were legion and were legends, and section of the Sauna's website promoting special bear nights included a video of some Japanese man stripping down and changing into a priest's outfit. Cardinal Bertone, who held the Vatican's purse strings under the previous Pope, Benedict, was said to have been behind the purchase of the block of flats in 2008. Now, this current document that's out singled out the Congregation for the Propagation of Faith, a Vatican department that owns hundreds of exclusive properties in Rome worth millions. And, I never told you some of the things you'll find. They're buying up Rome. I mean, are they busy saving souls, or are they busy buying up commercial properties? The buildings were referred to as peppercorn rents, defined as merely nominal rent and kind of operating to keep alive a title, that were being leased cheaply as favors to powerful colleagues. These claims threaten to expose people in the upper echelons of the corrupt global political food chain. The confidential Vatican documents were reportedly leaked by a Vatican mole. 2 people, a high-ranking Vatican Monsignor and laywoman, have been arrested in connection with this probe into these leaked documents, which Pope Francis has denounced as a crime. Now, what is he denouncing as a crime here? Is he denouncing that the people that leaked this information committed a crime, or that the people going to these brothels have the priests going to the brothels have committed a crime? Well, that's interesting. But the thing, so here's their solution, I think. They're creating their own brothels for their priests to go to, and gay sex houses, so that they can cut down on doing it in public. Okay, congratulations, Vatican. Now, another thing you got to remember, when I was there in Rome, and I like to tell this story, do you think this is, this is all made up, it's only a couple priests? No, this is an epidemic. And back in the 80s when I was there, if you ever go to Rome or even look at a picture, you'll see St. Peter's Square. Now, if you just point your hand to the right, when you're standing in St. Peter's Square and you start walking that way, you'll get to a first street. Okay? Right? It runs parallel to St. Peter's Square. To the right, there's one long street. Now, that street, I was told, because I had friends there, I used to have coffee there, used to be called, before World War II, the Strada di Buttani. Now, translated, that is the street of the whores. Now, they used to, before, and this is documented by the old Italian guys living there. I remember talking to some old Italian guys who used to work there. What they did with this street, it was lined with brothels, and the priests just used to walk across the street and, do what they did. One side was for the women, one side was for the gays. So this was going on. Well, after World War II, they wanted to clean up their image, according to a couple, wise Italians that I talked to that gave me the inside story of what was going on there. They moved it to another section of town, farther away, so that it wasn't so close to home. Now the street, if you go there, is filled with religious artifact shops. You can buy holy water, supposedly you can buy all these statues of all these idols, these pagan idols, and there's a sprinkling of coffee shops and a couple of restaurants. So they've kind of cleaned up their act near home, But the same thing's going on. So now they're moving into Piazza Barberini, and things haven't changed one bit, have they? So that is the Vatican's solution to their pedophilia problem. Create their own brothels. Well, it didn't work after World War II. Why should it work today? But who knows? Just one little story about our good friends over in Rome. And I'm sure they, buying up all these, when you're inside with those people, let's say you're going to take a trip to Rome, and you're one of the New World Order leaders, you're going to get treated like a king. You get put up in one of these really nice places in Rome, and boy, treated to any kind of sex you want. That's what really goes on, folks. And that's why it's hypocritical in the case of the Alamo ministry when they're doing the exact opposite. And I've presented a video that shows the good they're doing. But because of their stance, because they would not leave out the Vatican in this kind of discussion that's in the book of Revelations as well as the Antichrist, they have been targeted. We'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. if some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased. It has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and we're on FirstAmendmentRadio.com this November 12th, 2015 evening. Now, I said I was going to remain peaceful, harmonious, and strictly stick to the facts in this show, and I try to do that in most shows. Now, going back 10, 15, 20 years, things weren't always that way. And I think when you start researching this story, or you're a person that really wants to get to the truth about most any issue, but when we're talking about these things that are really out of our control, and you see the fruits of this evil work sometimes, your first emotion is you're going to deny all this stuff. I remember way back when I first started researching the Vatican. I grew up as a Catholic and went to Notre Dame High School, etc. Then off to a public university and then a public law school. But the point I'm trying to make is when I first started learning about these things, when I worked as a journalist in Rome, going there with no idea, my first reaction was complete denial. But something opened my eyes. And as I continued to deny these things, I continued to find more evidence showing that the Jesuits, for example, are a military organization, not a religious order. And when I started to see their purpose and their agenda, I began to stray away from that feeling of denial or saying, no, it can't be. This can't be the truth. This is insane. These are propaganda people spreading lies about the church that I was brought up in. But when I finally overcame that, based on mostly secular information at the time, I never read anything about the Bible. I grew up Catholic. They don't give you that. You grow up reading, and I find so many people in Protestantism really don't understand what happens to you in Catholic school and how you are subjected to all of these symbols and idols and things that are pagan, and everything is ceremonious, and you don't ever get to this relationship with God. You are to go to the priest to get there, and that's imperative. You got to go to confession, and you don't think they know who you are when they go there? Oh, they know who you are. They can see through that little thing, that little box you go into. So they know. But the point I'm trying to make is that once you get over that denial, and it's usually this stage, in some can last forever. In my case, it didn't. But it's really difficult when you grow up, I think more so if you're a Catholic, because you really have believed in them. And when that belief is shattered, a part of you goes with it. And so when I got over that, and that was strictly through secular investigation, I did not want to deal with God. I did not want to deal with anything. I was more of an atheist than anything. Because of now I'm thinking, well, look at this deceit. Look at these people that are doing, and based, and that wasn't so much based on what was going on in the past, but it was what I was seeing in Rome. I was there during the Vatican bank scandal, and out of evil comes good, in a sense, because I learned so much there. But the people that sacrificed or paid the price was amazing. People were getting bumped off left and right because they were going to start talking about the financial connection in the Vatican bank to the mafia and to the all of these investments that people lost millions of dollars over, and the Vatican benefited. And it even went, there was a huge, when I was in Italy, there was a huge earthquake in Naples, and you wouldn't believe the money they took. I'm talking about through charity organizations and other things that never got to the people and just went into their coffers and into accounts overseas, into the Caymans or some other place where they can funnel through the Vatican bank. Then it can go anywhere, and there's no overseeing of this bank. The guy who ran it had no banking experience. It was when I was there, Father Marcinkus. I've told you his stories. And that reminds me, I get so tired of some of these videos. Most of these people have no, and I'm not talking about the really good researchers, but a lot of these guys that are spreading rotten information have no personal history. They've not seen it with their own eyes. They have not really struggled to get to the truth. They're basically there with a hidden agenda to keep you from getting to the truth, and that's part of the Jesuit strategy. And learning that, I learned it through many stories that I was covering in Rome. And I've gone over some of them over the years. But the point is when you're there and you see it, once I got over, talking about Marcinkus, let me just tell you a story. Just so, if you haven't caught it in some of my other shows, and I talk about it all the time. Marcinkus was a cardinal from Chicago, my hometown. And before this scandal broke, he was fairly accessible, not so much so. I mean, the stories that were coming out were getting more dicey and dicey about who this guy was. And even prior to that, when the Pope John Paul was murdered after 33 days in office, he was going to clean up the Freemasonry connection between the Vatican hierarchy and the Freemasons in the P2 Lodge there, which was a Freemasonic lodge where over 150 high-level priests, including Marcinkus, were members. And so when you hear the story that the Vatican denounces Freemasonry, it's basically cover. They denounce it publicly, but privately they work hand in hand. So Marcinkus was outed as one of those, but that didn't mean anything. And if you read ecclesiastical law is interesting when you read it. It's close to fascism. Well, it is. It's a fascist way of viewing. It's laws that are set up, adjudicated in Rome, in the Vatican alone, and that's where they have their own system, and it's not as open as you think. It's a very closed system. But when you read ecclesiastical law, one of their main laws is that if you are a member of a Freemasonry lodge, you're excommunicated. That means you're no longer a Catholic. Well, these guys were never excommunicated. Nothing ever happened. And guess what happened when the Pope was trying to clean this up? This is just one reason. He was killed. That's ecclesiastical law. Just like they treat heretics. People don't understand that they still believe this stuff. Yep, if you don't follow the Pope, you are a heretic. And that means they can kill you, and it's not murder. That is ecclesiastical law at the highest level. So all this stuff, and when you start seeing that Benedict, and I'm sure Francis is no different, start passing out legal documents to their bishops stating, we will handle things ecclesiastically with all of our pedophile and sex-abusing priests. You do not go to the city or state that they're in and give any information to anyone. And guess what? If they did, they'd lose their position. They'd be excommunicated because, you know what? They take first allegiance to the ecclesiastical law, not to the law of the state or the city they're involved in. Now, why wasn't Benedict brought to prosecution for that, obstruction of justice? Because the prosecutors and the courts are in bed with them. That is why. There is no fairness here. What do you think all these, they're all involved in the Knights of Malta working together so they can get away with anything they want. So what does that translate to? You have judges in San Francisco, for example, I've dealt with, research cases there, that actually, say they're adhering to the Constitution and American law, when the fruits of their decisions are showing you they are basically upholding ecclesiastical law. And you say, no, well, I look at what the decisions have come, and they're pretty strange. I mean, when you get all the facts stating a case against the Vatican, and somehow it never gets done, and it's dismissed because of some procedural situation, so they never have to really get to the fruits of the case. You know what they're doing. Now, when you look at this organization, the Jesuit military organization, the next step you go through, after you've basically ran the gamut of denial, is anger. You begin to want to lash out at these people. You begin to want to argue with them. You begin to want to put them, you want to put them right where they belong, right? And so you go through that stage, and you begin to try to deal with these people in maybe what you think is the right adversarial way. That is, okay, let's do revolution. Let's get rid of the Jesuits. How many times you hear these guys, say, oh, the only thing we can do to solve this country is to throw all the Jesuits out. Or the only thing to do is to go back to the Constitution and to the Founding Fathers and revolt, go to Washington. And you go through that stage. And I went through the same thing. However, you reach a point of understanding, and that stage of anger, how many patriots, and there's some good people, are still into that? That ain't going to get you anywhere. And the point is, once you get to a situation of understanding, you begin to realize that that's exactly what they want you to do. They want chaos. They want you to get angry. They want you to revolt. They want you they bring the enemy to me. And they use Sun Tzu's Art of War. Let me read this. And you don't think that that book was translated by Ricci back then for a reason? It's still being used today. Because Sun Tzu wrote, and they follow this. Now listen why you can't take that route. And the reason, I'm going to read it in a second, but let me explain why. Because in each and every argument you make, let's say you head up an organization that wants to overthrow a certain thing that's going to get into the pocketbook of the government. And you start arguing with them. All they're going to do is turn around and say, you don't love this country, you don't love God, and you're the enemy. And they'll do that in most every movement you'll find if you go up against them in an adversarial way. Now, if you go up against them by bringing facts, by talking, by prefacing your statements by, I'm not here to overthrow you. I'm here to tell you who you are and why have you been lying to me? Why am I a threat? But anyway, the reason why, if you go through this anger and you get involved in all of these things, they're trying to bring you into this chaos so they can arrest you, so they can, in a sense, turn the tide on you and say you're not a lawful person. You don't believe in God. You don't believe in God and country. And the reason they do is, I can pull a little quote here by Sun Tzu. He says, I demand the art of making enemies move as one wishes. So anyone who opposes the Pope in any way, whether it be on a large scale or a small scale, is the enemy. Anyone who doesn't follow the Pope is the enemy according to ecclesiastical law. You are a heretic. Now, what is their strategy? They want to make enemies move as one wishes. Those who possess this art know how to arrange their men and armies, and they command in such a way that they make the enemy come toward them. See, what they're doing is making you come toward them for a reason. Then they can basically overthrow you whenever they judge it appropriate. They know how to make generous gifts when appropriate, even to those they wish to conquer. They give the enemy, and the enemy receives. They abandon things to him, and he comes to them. They are ready for anything. They take advantage of any circumstance. They do not fully trust those whom they employ even. See, they have a lot of people working for them, but they don't trust those people either. And you will see throughout, if you start researching these guys, a lot of these people that were actually working for them were paying the price, the ultimate price. Now, they do not fully trust those whom they employ, but choose others to be their overseers that they do trust. They do not count on their own strength alone, but use other means which they believe can be useful to them. Remember the statement. Now, the more scandals the Vatican gets involved with, the more people think they're weak. They use it to their benefit. And they're allowed to do that because they're not brought to justice. Because the people in the highest parts of our country, the ones that are the overseers of the people they don't trust, are in the highest positions. That's why we have this corruption that leaks down. They do not count on their own strength, remember that. They consider the men against whom they must fight to be stones or pieces of wood, which they have been asked to roll down a slope. So you're not looked at as a human being. That's obvious in the Alamo Ministry case. They looked at these people not as human beings, but they took their property as if they were pieces of wood or just stones to be rolled down a hill and forgotten about. That's what you are in their eyes. You therefore, who are commanding an army, must act in such a way that the enemy is in your hands, like a round stone that you have caused to roll down a mountain 1,000 paces high. See, they're using you. Thus it will be recognized that you have power and authority, and that you are truly worthy of the position you occupy. Just a little bit of their strategy. Just a little bit of how they operate, so you know what you're up against. So when you go through this period of anger, when you realize that the road to real truth here is understanding, but understanding not only yourself, but the enemy. And I don't believe you can get this understanding unless you begin to incorporate the spiritual aspect of this whole story, which I've tried to do. And what that means is, for me, it meant I had to start reading the Bible to understand where this was where this whole story began, and it's incredibly traced in the Bible. And one of the reasons why they don't want you to read it, one of the reasons why I was prevented from reading it as a Catholic, is because they don't want you to figure that out. They want you to have the Bible in the background so that they can interpret it when the issues come up, and you aren't smart enough to do that. And in fact, I've got quotes even back in the 70s and 80s when bishops were saying that. Catholic bishops stating that you are not smart enough to interpret the Bible. We don't want you to go off on the wrong track, so we will do it for you. Now, if that isn't deception, what is? Taking away a person's own ability to read a book that has much to offer. And so the understanding of this story will never come unless you start reading those books. If you start understanding the spiritual aspect of this and making a decision on your own. Now, along the way, I have had a chance to look into many, many different religions around the world because it interested me. There's an aspect to this that needs to be discussed. Hinduism, Buddhism, all of the different Seventh-day Adventists, all of these different organizations. And once you start doing that, even the Quran is a book that is remarkably similar to Catholicism. And so it's imperative to read that, to understand it. Now, also, during this period of understanding, when you realized you got to put down the hand, you got to put down the swords of anger in this case, and begin to understand this, you have to go back into their occult history and start reading some of the major occult books that they follow to understand exactly where they're going in this satanic world they live in. Now, evil isn't only satanic. It is expressed every day through the usage of even this Sun Tzu's Art of War that gets out into the public, and businessmen start wanting to war against other businessmen and use these principles to get their way. This is all just an aspect of evil that they love. And so it's imperative to read all that stuff so you can start seeing how they operate, what world they really operate in. And once you get to that point, and I remember when I was doing this, certain people would say, I'm not going to read those books because it's going to lead me, the devil will take over. Oh, that's not true. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Because your faith, your strength, is much stronger than anything that Satan or this satanic world can bring to you. You're protected. But you're not protected if you don't understand. That is why when a person asks me, or when someone says, well, I know what good and evil is, and I've made the choice of good. I said, well, really, where does that choice come from? How are you making that? What are you comparing that? I don't think a choice between good and evil is made until you begin to really understand a relationship you have with the Creator, with God, and how it really plays out in the world you live, and being truthful in every aspect of it. And that is my big gripe against this ecumenical movement, where the Vatican Protestant ministers of this country have gone to bed with them, are basically annexed by the Catholic Church, because they're not giving you the truth. They're masquerading. They're giving you part truth. You're not given the real story to make a real choice between good and evil. Because they want to take you just like the Catholic priest that told me, you don't need to read the Bible, Greg. We will interpret it for you. These Protestant ministers are no different. Oh, you think you're getting the Bible. You think you're getting the truth, but you're not. In fact, they're even worse. At least the Vatican comes out and tells you, okay, we don't want to read the Bible. You can't understand it. We'll understand it. The trickery and the deceit in some of these Protestant ministers the ones that are in the ecumenical movement, the ones I remember even talking to Tony Alamo about, who he was trying to expose, as well as other pastors that I've talked to that want this information out, very few and far between anymore. These guys in the ecumenical movement are as deceitful as they come. Because I believe most of them know. And they just sit there in their ivory tower on Sunday and give you what you think to be the Word of God. You have to search it out. Even in this age of deception, it's very, very difficult. And that's what they want. But I believe if you have the proper understanding, the proper information, both spiritually and secularly, put forth to you, you will make your own decision based on all of the facts, not just those selected for you by our elites, by those who want you to be nothing more than obedient slaves and workers, because that benefits them. Well, we're all out of time. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.